Hello, and welcome to the first of our Race Ready with PeaceHealth series. I'm Ian Dobson. I'm the Eugene Marathon Race Director. In this series, we're going to team up each month with a PeaceHealth caregiver to explore a topic related to preparing for the Eugene Half Marathon, or 5K. So kind of a broad spectrum of topics, and they should be relevant to all our distances. So we're going to kick off this month with PeaceHealth physical therapist Christina Perez to discuss some strategies, habits, and exercises that can help people get ahead of some of the problems that are common among runners, especially early on in a training cycle. So I'm very pleased to be here with Christina. So Christina, can you give us a bit of an introduction to yourself and what your background is professionally as a runner and all that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me here today, Ian. So I'm a physical therapist at PeaceHealth over in Riverbend in Springfield, Oregon. I primarily work in the acute therapies department right now, but I have experience in the outpatient clinic physical therapy setting as well. I've been with PeaceHealth for about 4 years, and I really love what we have going on with our team in the rehab department. Personally, I've been running for most of my life. My mom's an avid runner, so I've seen her do, her ultra marathons and train for that, and as well as the Boston Marathon. And then myself in my college years, I ran cross country for Humboldt State. I have to admit, I love the half marathon distance. I have done a full. I did CIM in 2018. But I have to admit the half marathon distance is a healthier balance for me, given my work-life situation. So that's what I plan to do this year. So I'll see all the runners out on the course.
I feel like that's with all due respect to your mom, who's an ultra marathoner, it sounds like, I feel like there's some sort of inverse, sort of survival instinct versus distance that you're running, some relationship there where I think a half marathon is a smart distance, isn't it?
Yeah, I've also seen her too with her own fair share of injuries too during her ultra marathon years. And so I think even before I got my degree in physical therapy, even as a kid in high school, I kind of recognized that, maybe too much running and maybe some of the things that my mom did along the way in her training weren't the best. And that might've led to some of her injuries. Yeah.
Yeah. I can imagine it's a different set of injuries and a different set of problems that an ultra marathoner or habitual marathoner would experience versus somebody who's running like collegiately, running on the track, those kind of things. So maybe we can get into that if we have time here, but so I think to frame kind of for our viewers kind of what we're hoping to cover here, I think it might be helpful to start with just a little bit of a discussion of the difference between rehab and prehab. I think for myself, I grew up familiar with the term rehab and just this general framework of seeing a physical therapist for rehab type things. In my mind, I have a sense of what I'm hoping we can cover with like prehab kind of things where again, we're in February right now, got 2.5+ months until the Eugene Marathon events. So at this point in a training cycle, hopefully it's less about managing like specific problems that have come up and more about anticipating what those are going to be and getting ahead of them. So can you kind of lay a framework from your sort of professional perspective around that? And am I on the right path there in terms of that being relevant to people at this point?
Yeah, absolutely. So to touch on that, I would definitely say prehab is kind of just this ideology of like kind of what you said, Ian, anticipating that there are probably going to be some hiccups along the way with your training and knowing what's going to work best for you. So to kind of further elaborate on that, I myself know that typically if I do any more mileage, more than about like 40 to 50, then I start to feel more aches and pains along the way. So what I typically do is I kind of cap it at that. I just know that's my threshold, that's my limit, and I don't try to go more than that. And so really with prehab, what you're doing is you're kind of preemptively giving yourself some reflection time about what you think might happen during these several weeks out while you're going to be training for this distance.
Right. It seems like, I mean, there are a lot of I mean, a lot of us share common kind of injuries as runners or things that come up. I mean, like I have kind of chronic calf issues. I feel like I'm constantly in this sort of prehab, sort of rehab, sort of state of like trying to keep them healthy, but also trying to get them healthy. And so I'm wondering, and maybe we can get to this in a little bit, but talking through some specific, some of the specific exercises that might be common among other runners. But maybe before we get to that, can you talk a little bit about just kind of a framework that you might use for helping people understand what is an appropriate mileage or volume for them? You mentioned you've kind of found that for yourself. Kind of how do you find that? And then how does that relate to race distance, race goals too? So kind of the framework for thinking about how a person would set out on this training journey.
Yeah, so I think at this very beginning stage where you're just starting to create a training plan, you need to realize what your fitness goals currently are and then what you're trying to get towards. So Ian, you might be doing this too during some of your racing, but I don't try to increase my mileage more than about 10 or 15% of what my weekly goal is. So for example, I mentioned that typically 40 a week is like my cap. I don't want to push it anymore because I start feeling some things that I don't want to get into full-blown injuries. So basically, if I haven't been running for a very long time and I'm trying to get back into it, right? I don't try to increase more than about that 10 or 15% of 40. So about 4 to 6 miles a week. And then from there, I'm going to keep building up my mileage slowly. That way I'm not all of a sudden just spiking it, and which could lead into more like injuries essentially down the road.
So talk to about, so once you get up to a mileage, let's say you're training for a half marathon, right? It's great. Do you, recognizing it's going to be different for different people, but do you see that sort of 10% holding even when it's sort of up and down? Like, for example, I'm thinking of like, a person might do 3 weeks of kind of peak mileage sort of at say 40, and then come down and come back up to 40. Do you think, so the question I guess is, do you think there's a difference between like kind of a variability of mileage within a training plan if a person needs a recovery week or something versus that 10% or 15% rule of thumb, at least in terms of increasing mileage as you're building into a training plan? Does that question make sense?
It does make sense. Yeah. So what I would kind of recommend is that, you're going to probably have your skeleton of your framework for your training program, where you have something basically on a calendar about what days you're going to be doing what type of mileage. If you start noticing aches and pains, you're going to have to start thinking kind of flexible, right? I think I might need to dial it down this week because I'm starting to notice my calf is bothering more. So I might just need to let off of that a little bit and then check back in the following training week to see if you're in a better state or if it's starting to progressively get worse, right? So you're kind of doing a little bit of both. To answer your question, Ian, is you have this framework and you have this training mold of your program, but throughout the whole training period, if things happen and come along the way, you're going to have to tweak it and be mindful of it. So especially like with mental burnout, right, in your training, if you're just having a really bad day, whether it be at work or in your personal life, and you just don't have the stamina or the mental capacity to try to do the long distance that you were supposed to do, it's okay to dial it back and to not do that distance. Instead, pair it with some other type of cardio workout like swimming or cycling, and then pairing it with some sort of yoga or Pilates afterwards, I think would be a really good alternative. And that way you're kind of eliminating the mental burnout that comes along during this whole training process, because it really is a long period of training. It's not just like, a few weeks and then it's race day, you know what I mean? So this is going to be good for the longevity of it.
Yeah, no, that totally resonates. And it's, I have the pleasure of coaching a high school team here. Also have a dog that mail's being delivered, I think, excuse me. But I coach a high school team here in Eugene and have really kind of tried to preach that to the high school athletes of like really you have a certain amount of kind of oomph in your day. I call it mental energy, and if it's one of those days, sometimes it might just be good to go for that easy run that feels comfortable and isn't part of the training program, but really keeps them afloat, keeps them going. And I mean, I feel like it should be fun most of the time, right?
Yes.
There's gonna be some of those days where you got to kind of put your head down and get through it, but that idea of not always banging your head against the walls really resonates. And maybe you can talk about goal setting a little bit too, in terms of different frameworks for that. And also maybe you're using your goals as an example here. What is your goal for the Eugene Half Marathon?
Well, so my boyfriend and I just got a puppy this past year. And so he's nearing a year, but I can confidently tell you that during this whole year of having our puppy, my mileage has severely declined. And even just getting a few miles in here and there is an accomplishment for me. So now that he's a year old and we're past the puppy training and the potty training stage of things, I'm definitely starting to get back into it. So I basically started a couple weeks ago, and I'm starting to be more consistent. That's my goal right now. And then eventually I'm going to start increasing my mileage, but I would like to get under 2 hours for this race. And really I haven't raced in probably at least a couple of years before COVID. So I'm kind of just wanting to have a good time and start getting into a good groove again with a good running routine beyond the race even. So.
Well, I hope that happens. I hope that goes well. I feel like
thanks.
If anyone has the tools to do that, it should be you, right? So, do you want to segue maybe into talking about some specific prehab type exercises that people can use kind of in their toolbox of training, right? That things that they can tap into, and maybe, I don't know if you can demonstrate any of them or how you want to approach that, but talk through that and talk through how people might add those in or when that's appropriate.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a few exercises, off the top of my head that I would really highly recommend. Typically what we see with some runners is that they end up having some sort of knee or foot pain or something. And as we know, since running is a repetitive form of exercise, these kind of overuse injuries are what can creep up on athletes. So what I would probably recommend is really trying to focus on your glutes, so your butt muscles. And oftentimes when a lot of folks do that, I often find that their other ailments start, going away. So I have a few in mind, and I'll show you guys. Pardon me while I just transition this computer elsewhere.
And glutes, I'm gonna jump in, and you can correct me, Christina, please, if I'm off on this. But I feel like these are what turn off, in a sense, right? When we sit all day, right? I can just feel myself right now, the front of me as I sit here in a chair getting tight, and my glutes not being strong and flexible, and I feel like I'm doing it wrong sitting here right now. But for those of us that are sitting in chairs a lot, I mean, am I right on that?
Yes, you are absolutely right on that. And oftentimes, what I find with some novice runners is that they're recruiting sometimes their back muscles or other muscle groups instead of using their glutes in order to accomplish their running form. So a lot of times that's what I'm noticing with especially the beginner runner population. So the first exercise I'll show you, Ian, is a clam shell. This one's going to be working some of your middle glutes, basically the medial ones. And essentially what you want to make sure of is that you have your knees bent at about 90 degrees. You're just resting your elbow down on the ground, and then you have the resistance band above the knees. And what you're doing is you're going to keep your hips stable, so you're not going to let them roll back as you do the movement. You're basically just going to be putting more tension on the resistance band and lifting your top knee up. Slow and controlled. And you could probably do about 3 sets of 10. You'll definitely feel a good burn, and then alternate to the other side.
So can I ask, as you're doing that, it doesn't look to me like you're getting a lot of range of motion there.
No. It's very much so a small but isolated muscle activation of the glute med. Yep. So I'm not going up. I'm basically pinching my heels together down at my feet as if if you can tell from this angle.
Yeah.
And really, yeah, what I'm trying to do is just do a small movement, and then you will feel a little bit of tension right up here, kind of by like top part of your hip and the side of your bone.
And if you're feeling it, I think as someone who probably often does this wrong, if you're feeling your low back working in this exercise, is that okay, or is that not? Like, are you going to feel a little bit, or talk about that? I feel like you said, a lot of us kind of go to our low back and we kind of recruit from there.
Right.
Is that a problem with this exercise, or are we trying to avoid that, or how?
We are trying to avoid it. So if you notice you're starting to do it, then I would probably alternate where your hand placement is. Maybe just go down on your side instead. That way you're not tempted to do the twisting, and that way you're really isolating right up here.
Perfect.
That makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. I have another exercise too in mind. It's a pretty common one. I feel like most folks have at least heard of this one in one way or another, but this is just a simple bridge. Again, this is working on your glute muscles, but it's also helping out your hamstrings, the back of your thigh, that muscle group. So basically what you'll do is you'll keep the resistance band right above your knee, just the way that I had with the clam shell. And what you're going to do is keep the tension on the resistance band, but you're going to basically push through the heel and then squeeze your bum and then go slowly up and down. And then an alternative exercise that you could do in order to make this harder is to just do it on a single leg. So that would make the exercise a little bit more challenging, but start with both legs first before you progress.
And as you're doing that, you're putting resistance on the band, right? As you said.
I'm basically maintaining the same amount of tension the whole way on the up and the down phase. Yep, exactly.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And is that targeting essentially the same muscle groups, right? Primarily, or is there a subtle distinction between those two in terms of what a person should be feeling, or are they two versions of a similar type of activation?
No, they're kind of targeting slightly different glute muscle groups. There's a whole family of the glute muscles, and so this is working slightly different ones than the exercise involving the clam shell. But all the glutes are important with recruitment for running. So really, by doing these variety of exercises, you're kind of targeting the different ones of the glute family, basically.
Perfect. So it's not an either or. It's like, let's do them all. Like,
no, yeah, basically.
Perfect.
I have one more in mind too that I'll show you. And as I stand to demonstrate this one, you'll probably just see my lower half, but that's the part you need to see anyways. So this next one is a monster walk. What I'm going to do is I'm going to keep the tension on this band constant the whole way through. And I'm basically just going to be taking small side steps while maintaining the tension the whole way through. You do a few steps one way and then go the other way. You'll definitely be feeling a burn by the end of this one.
So as you're doing that, can I ask about the band? Like, is that, I know you can get resistance bands like that in different strengths, essentially. Is it like, is heavier better here? Is lighter better? I mean, should a person be working up in resistance, or is it just all the same?
Yeah, you want to start with probably a lower resistance and then work your way up. And the reason why I say that is because oftentimes I'll find that people are doing too high of a resistance, and then they're not correctly doing the exercise because they're just trying to increase the load too abruptly from what their muscles can allow.
Okay. So
I would start with a lower one. And the nice thing about these kind of bands is you could buy these probably as a package deal where they're in a variety of levels of resistance. You probably buy them at like Walmart or Target or any one of the stores around town.
And like, should you be sore from this? Like when you start doing these, should they expect to be sore? Is that good or bad? Or talk about that, just initial feeling of when you're starting to do these.
Mm-hmm. They'll likely be sore at the very beginning because oftentimes these are the muscles that we're not normally recruiting a ton. And these exercises are really isolating just those one or two muscle groups. So they'll probably be sore, like definitely sore initially, but then it should fade with time because your body starts getting used to that kind of load. So your muscles are going to get stronger along the way as you keep doing this as part of your training.
Okay. Okay. Are those, so am I to understand that if I do those three things, I'm never getting hurt? Is that?
Well, I can't guarantee it, but I think this is definitely a good part of the recipe for success.
Yeah.
It's being mindful about different muscle groups that you're really going to be recruiting repetitively as you run. And those ones are often overlooked with a lot of novice runners. And so that's kind of why I wanted to highlight especially the glute muscle family, is that those are often kind of overlooked. We know squats, we know lunges, and those are great, but these ones help target slightly different ones that are just as important as the ones that we know most commonly.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. We have some questions from Instagram one of which, and I don't know if you want to stay where you are, but it's
Okay.
asking about how to keep our feet happy. So, and I want to tag onto that with asking you about your take on barefoot running in moderation, not running marathons barefoot, but yeah, can you talk about foot health kind of too?
Definitely. So I would say that, as you're starting this journey of your half marathon or marathon training, it's definitely a really good idea just to go to a running store where they could just have you get fitted so that you know that you are the right shoe size. Even if it's just like a half a shoe size, it could make or break unnecessary blisters or even toenails that get bruised in the process. So really, that's a good idea just to get help from someone who knows about running shoes, because we all place tension and weight distribution in different parts of our feet. And so by having the incorrect shoe on while you're training, it could really add other injuries and aches and pains in other joints because of it. And so that's one thing that I would really recommend, just having someone who knows a little bit more about shoes and running analysis in general, just to get fitted. And I think that'd be a really good beginning point before you even start running, basically.
Okay. To follow up on that, do you have a sense or any sort of feeling just from professionally about carbon plate shoes? Like, that's very new. A lot of people are racing in, and whether they're the Nike carbon plate, or I think all the other companies have them now too. Is that something that you've encountered in terms of impact, good or bad, or just neutral on people running?
I haven't encountered that too much, so I would probably say I'm more neutral on it. I don't know, you might know a little bit more than I would in that, but I really haven't seen too many runners talk about it. I know for a while we had the Hoka wave of like the Hoka shoes.
Yeah.
So that's the biggest wave that I feel like in the past year that I've known, but I'm a little out of touch, I would say, probably with the carbon kind of shoes myself.
It's interesting because I mean I haven't heard either way either. I feel like we would be hearing if there was a consensus one way or the other, but anytime there's something new like that, that's kind of, a lot of people are using, it's my instinct is to approach it with some bit of skepticism maybe, which in this case may not be fair, it sounds like. So. Right.
And I feel like we kind of saw that too with the barefoot running, is that a lot of folks got into, the wave of it, but I mean, I have like a personal story of like a friend who bought a pair of the Vibram barefoot shoes, and she really hadn't trained in them at all. But then all of a sudden, the first event that she ran in them was like a 5K turkey trot. And she was definitely feeling it by the end of the race, because her body just wasn't used to it. She hadn't really put the time and effort into training with that type of shoe. And then afterwards, I felt like, she went through a lot of unnecessary aches and pains after race, because she just hadn't really strategized or, created a plan of how she was going to implement this new shoe.
So do you think there's a point, I just turned 40 years old, so this is top of my mind here. Is there a point at which certain things like minimal shoes or or maybe not maximal shoes or something, that we pass a point where we can adapt. I guess the question is coming from a sense of going back to that I think it was a little bit of a fad, but barefoot running fad. But I tend to think, like with high school kids that I coach, I like to get them running barefoot just a little bit, like doing some cool downs on a turf field barefoot. Something just, it's not specific, but just a sense that that's going to help and make their feet stronger. I wonder though, if A, am I totally nuts on that? Or B, is there a point at which you see people like myself, as you've gotten older and we've run for a number of years, or we just aren't adapting the same, where we should just stop trying with some of those things and say, like, hey, you're not going to adapt to, your feet are not going to get a whole lot stronger. What you need to do is sort of keep them from getting weaker. Does that make sense? Like, is there sort of this question like, are there certain things like barefoot running, maybe as an example, that are potentially really good at some point in your lifetime, and then as you get older, as an older athlete, maybe we need to stay away from them? Or is that kind of a myth?
I think probably the physical therapist in me would tell you to be more conservative, because with the whole prehab concept, it's about trying something that's going to be good for you. And I wouldn't always say different is going to be better for you than what you're used to with your routine. And I typically am of the mentality of, like, if it's not broken, don't fix it necessarily. So for, your athlete who's been a runner for, 20 years or whatever, if something's working for you, I don't necessarily believe that you need to change up your formula. If what you're doing is working and you're getting results from it, I don't necessarily think you need to completely rock the boat. That's just my mentality, because, as a physical therapist, I see a lot of our older population in the hospital. And, some of them have bunions or very high arches, or they start to have like rheumatoid arthritis, and it's affecting like the bones in their feet even. Or their diabetes is out of control. And so the structure of their joints are starting to actually get weaker because the bones are weakening. And so I would definitely say, with our older population, I would probably be more leery, just because typically as you get older, I would probably say more stability is probably going to be better for you, just because, around your lifetime, you'll have other injuries, and you don't want those old injuries to be highlighted with these new ones that you might bring into play because you changed everything around necessarily. So that's just from my experience in the hospital. I see folks in those kind of situations. And so I like I said, I don't think you necessarily need to change anything if it's working for you and it's proven to be successful, the formula for your running.
That makes a lot of sense. Can you, we've got a few minutes left here. One of the things that I definitely wanted to ask you about and get your take on is how people can kind of self-assess what's normal soreness, what are some normal aches and pains that we might expect versus something that is trending towards an injury, or something that might require something other than just a little bit of ice and rest, right? How do we understand what's an ache and a pain and what's an injury?
Right. So I would probably say is like almost keeping like a journal log while you're in your training is probably a good idea, because you could do different journal logs about how your runs are feeling, how you're feeling, like, emotionally or spiritually during your runs, whether you're fatigued and tired or whether you're starting to actually physically feel some aches and pains. So keeping a journal is going to help you kind of be able to retrace your steps and self-reflect on when the aches and pains began. But I would probably tell you that, week by week, you're going to basically have to step back and reflect a little bit. Like, I had this ache, my calf was hurting me a little bit last week. The ache is starting to get worse the week after. And then 2 weeks out now, it's still bad. Like, it's not getting better. That's when you probably want to start changing some things up, or, getting that treated before it becomes like a full-blown injury. But typically, if it's getting worse week by week by week, and you're trying everything else to alleviate it and it's not getting better, that's typically a red flag that it's probably time to intervene in a different way. And that might mean, you know, potentially going to your doctor and just trying to get it checked out, just so you can prevent some sort of, you know, shin splint or stress fracture, which is pretty common with these, you know, repetitive movements like the sport of running, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. I mean, as you're saying that, it sort of resonates as like in contrast to what you're saying before, like, you know, if things are good, if it's not broken, don't fix it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also, I mean, it's almost common sense, right? If it is broken, if it keeps getting worse, you got to fix it. Like, I mean, we're all, as simple as that sounds, like, I think we're all guilty, or maybe not all of us. I've been guilty. I think a lot of us are guilty of like that wishful thinking, you know, you're like, well, it might get better, right? If I keep, it might, but if you don't change anything, right, it's not, I mean, it's unlikely to, I suppose, if it keeps going the wrong direction. So, okay, let's see, got a couple more minutes here. Do you have one thing I wanted to ask you about is just kind of a common myths. If there are things that you feel like what I jotted down in my head that came to mind was like, you know, I remember when I was younger, hearing people talk about like how your knees are going to wear out if you run a lot. I've never experienced that, but at the same time, you know, I know that different people are very different, right? And are there things that you would, or just things that you've picked up along the way that you would want to share with a new runner in particular, although runner of any point in their career, that might be sort of counter to what a conventional wisdom would dictate?
Yeah, I mean, some folks, I mean, depending on your personality type, right? Like I myself am probably more type A than type B on the spectrum, especially when it's involving running. So I can definitely tell you through experience that there were many times where I overdid it and I should have just actually rested on my rest day instead of like going on like a 10-mile hike, right? That's not really restful. But it's hard because, you know, especially with that kind of personality type, your rest days feel so unproductive and it feels counterintuitive of what you need to do in order to train to get the results you want on race day. That I often find that I was just tacking on too much and then I didn't actually feel rested, but you need those rest days in order to actually get gains in the end. So listening to your body when it's trying to tell you something, I think is just really powerful, that my coaches have always told me. So if it means that, you know, like we've kind of touched on, if you aren't in the mental or the physical like space to try to do whatever mileage that your training program is telling you to do, it's okay to switch it up last minute and just decide to do something else because that's just what you need. Obviously, it's not a good idea to make a trend of that, but you know, giving yourself just some of those, you know, get out of jail free cards while you're training, because it's going to be several weeks out before the race. So I think showing up and being consistent is just a really good thing to do. But give yourself, you know, some slack too. You don't have to be perfect the whole time, and you don't have to try to hit every single, you know, mile split that you're trying to accomplish, like every single workout just in order to get whatever time on the race day. Like that's not going to dictate necessarily how you perform on race day just because you're not able to get like perfect 8-minute miles every single time, you know? So
I feel like it almost might be the opposite, where if you actually stuck yourself to that and did exactly what was on a training plan, I don't know that I've ever encountered that where it worked. I feel like that's like, if it almost feels like if you're not making adjustments, you might be doing something wrong, right? Which is super counterintuitive, I think, especially for people who like to have a plan. But I feel like what you're saying totally resonates, where it's like you have to expect to adjust. I mean, you have to make a plan, but those adjustments over a 3-month period or whatever the training cycle is, it's basically inevitable, right? I mean, it's
have a plan A, have a plan B, have a plan C, and you know, just allow whatever plan to happen as time allows and as your body allows too. That's my biggest piece of wisdom in order to try to avoid injuries and getting yourself into mental burnout too.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to share before we wrap up here?
I think we covered a lot of ground. I feel like we kind of hit a lot of different realms of prehab and just training in general.
I know I feel like I keep putting you on the spot here too with share another bit of wisdom with us, please.
Yeah. So
this has been wonderful though. Yeah.
Same. Yeah. It's been really fun chatting about this stuff. I definitely just recommend all the runners, just have fun. Like, you're putting all this time and effort into something that you're wanting to accomplish. And especially by race day, you should be having fun. At that point on race day, you've done everything you can, you put all the time and effort into it. Your family will be there to support you. They're going to try to encourage you the whole way through along your training regimen. So really, by race day, you've done everything that you can do. So, just have confidence in that, even if it's your first, half marathon or full marathon. Really just know that's going to carry you really far. And, no matter what the outcome is of race day, just know that you did your best. And if you don't get the results that you're not wanting, there's always another race in the future. So don't beat yourself up over it. Really have fun. You deserve it.
I love that sentiment. It totally resonates. I think, putting on my race organizer hat, it's like, we hope that our event is meaningful for people, right? And we hope that for some people, it's really a catalyst for doing something with themselves that they have wanted to do for a long time, or they're achieving big goals. But ultimately, we want people to walk away being just saying that was fun, and anything more than that is total bonus. But this is supposed to be fun, right? And it may not be fun every single time out, but on the whole, it's supposed to be fun. And I think that's to me, I appreciate hearing you say that about the entire process, right? That on the net, this should be fun. We should get something really positive out of this.
Yeah. And there's just something really powerful to be said about the energy on race day, when everyone knows, like, okay, I've done all my time, I've done all my efforts in this, like, let's get down to it. Let's do it. And the energy that you get from the person next to you, or the person in front of you, is really going to help guide you to the finish. And it's some kind of, I don't know, energy of camaraderie amongst like fellow runners during that time that I've always really missed since, not competitively racing anymore in college. So it's just a really fun atmosphere. So
isn't it? It's amazing. And I think, more than any time, I think most of us, I think, have missed it over these last couple of years, right? And I think it's, I'm not going to be out there running with you guys, but but I feel that same sort of energy of like, there is definitely something there, right? It's what, I ran collegiately as well. And like that sense of like just working together, and, I think most of us really thrive on that. So
it'll be a good level of giddiness on race.
It will, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think we'll wrap up here. This is the first of 3 Race Ready with PeaceHealth episodes we're going to be doing. So thank you again, Christina. I really, this was fun to chat. I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your experiences. Next month, we are going to have Cecilia Jacobson with us. She's a PeaceHealth registered dietitian. So until then, I think stay healthy and have fun.
Awesome. And bye, guys. I'll see you out on the course on race day.
Great.